Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Tiger Club of Kansas City Zoom call for December 8th, 2020. This is Mark Fitzpatrick, and I'm happy to be back hosting this week after battling COVID for the last 12 days. My wife and I have been super careful and both caught it. So it's just a reminder that please stay safe out there and wear a mask. It's a big weekend in Columbia coming up with the football Tigers taking on Georgia at 11 o'clock on Saturday. And the men's basketball team will meet number 6 ranked Illinois on Saturday evening. And if you're interested in the Tiger Club's parking passes or tickets, send an email to president@kctigerclub.com. Also on the horizon is National Letter of Intent Day, a week from tomorrow, when Coach Eli Drinkwitz will sign his second class, and the first class that he's fully recruited. And with that in mind, we're pleased to have as our guest speaker today, Danny Heitert, founder of STC Grid Reports, who's been evaluating high school football prospects for more than 3 decades. Danny played college football at what was then Southwest Missouri State and has been involved in coaching and scouting ever since. He has unique ability to assess talent and is regarded as a national expert. If you want to ask Danny some questions at the end of our discussion, you can use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Danny, welcome to your first meeting with the Tiger Club Kansas City.
Thank you, Mark. Pleased to be here.
We're really glad to have you. Tigers are coming off a dramatic 50-48 win over Arkansas on Saturday. Certainly one of the more exciting games we've seen. What about the job Coach Drinkwitz has done his first year, especially after his first spring practice season was wiped out by the pandemic?
Very impressive. I'm impressed by, it's kind of circumstantial evidence, but I'm from a distance kind of looking at what he says, what he does. I've not been to any practices. I've seen the Saturday games that have been played, but I'm very impressed with what he says. I think if you were a marketing guy, he says all the right things at the right time. Just in the most recent game, when the linebacker comes off the field after regurgitating the ball for this 2-point conversion, he builds them up. When the game's over and it's in his pocket as a win, he talks about how the defense has got to get things fixed. It wasn't right. And so he says the right things at the right time. So long story short, I'm impressed.
What kind of effect on recruiting does a win like that have, especially when the over-under on the Tigers going into the season was 2.5 wins? We're now at 5 wins, but a dramatic win like that over your arch rival, what can that do to recruiting?
Well, I'm a little counterintuitive on this. It can't hurt for sure, but I think if you looked at it versus, say, a Louisiana State game early in the season, I'd rather have the first one. And the reason that is because of the early signing period. Everything's been pushed forward. Decision-making's been pushed forward. And if you want to get some, recruits don't often change their minds, but if they do, they only usually do it once. And if they do it once, they usually do it early in the season when things start to go bad. And so I think back a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, the best player, high school player in the state of Missouri was Antonio Doyle out of Lutheran North. He was coming to Missouri. He liked Barry Odom. He was coming until we went out to Wyoming very early in the season and got beat. And he immediately opened up his recruiting, and now he plays special teams for Texas A&M. And he'll be on the field as a starter next year. So they all count, but I think they count more early, and that's counterintuitive because usually you want to have the last impression versus the first. But I just think this early signing period and COVID have changed things and really rattled the cages of recruiting.
The recruiting class for that Rivals shows commitments for Missouri right now has 20 commitments, and the Tigers are ranked 20th nationally, which is one of their best ever, maybe the best in memory. That's a heck of a job by Coach Drinkwitz's first full year of recruiting.
It is. I see some trends that he continued because he was really had his signature on the second part, the second signing period. In February last. He kind of stayed with the Odoms thing, signings, which was the way to go. But I can start to see some trends developing. And if it's all right with you, Mark, if I can give you a quick thumbnail, 3 sentences, 4 sentences on each of the signees, if you'd like.
Let's go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so if you start on offense, Macon, for Tyler Macon, from East St. Louis, if you thought of some similarities to, say, Matty Mock, I always try to either compare him to somebody that the audience may be familiar with. So he's got many of the good aspects, but he's got some additional things. He's a shorter guy. He's got a live arm. He throws better long than he does intermediate or short. He's quick. He's got some burst. But where Macon would stay with the first read and then go to chaos theory, this guy will stay with the plan. He'll go to his second and his third read while he's buying time with his feet. He's got more wiggle than Matty had. So he's a fine prospect that creates quality depth right away, along with Robinson, along with Cook, and now Basilak. At running back, if this player, B.J. Harris from Chattanooga, if he played in Missouri of this type of back, he would have been the best. He's very quick. He's a shorter guy. He's probably 5'9", 185. He's very quick, got a wicked change of direction, a burst. Think of Ish Witter, a little bit bigger. Ish Witter was very comfortable in confined space, would run inside despite his size. And so this guy reminds me of Witter a little bit. The other back they got is TJ Butts of DeSmet. He's the best type of back of his sort in the state this year. He's almost 200 pounds. He's 5'10". He's excellent blocker, just an excellent blocker for blitz pickup, things like that. Makes yards on contact all the time, does the little things, has got the really strong, drastic jump cut laterally right to left. So he gives you depth, a bigger back when our bigger running back goes out the door. At tight end, they picked up two. The one from Missouri, Ryan Horskamp. The comparison would be a couple of years ago, about 6 years ago. About 6 years ago, Hale Henches was a tight end at Helias who went
to Alabama.
Yeah, and he started for 3 years there out of 5. And so Horskamp is very similar, a little shorter, but he's a really strong edge blocker. Not Daniel Parker quite, but he's of that ilk, and he's got excellent hand-eye coordination. So the other tight end they picked up from Memphis, Tennessee, Gavin McKay, solid inline blocker on the edge, but he often splits out. He doesn't get a lot of reps, game snaps out right on the edge, but he is a good blocker, but got excellent hand-eye coordination. So he kind of reminds me, not in bodybuild at all, but of kind of the way they played in high school and what they did super well, and the others kind of well, as Messiah Swinson. When he came in from the East Coast, he was split out most of the time at 6'5", and a big guy, didn't block much, and so now he's just really starting to round in shape for the Tigers as a blocker. Gavin McKay's kind of like that, but he's 6'3". The offensive lineman they brought in is Connor Tollison from Jackson. Excellent lateral blocker, great skill, not a very intense guy, patient, poised, calm. Probably the best zone high school blocker, which is if you're zone blocking and that's a lateral move to your adjacent lineman's foot. Tollison is probably the best I've seen in a dozen years. Think Mike Badowski, Jefferson City High, Missouri Tigers. That kind of player is the way Tollison reminds me of. Defensive tackles, they brought in two. Now, the junior college player from Independence, Kansas, George Relis, I want to take a pass on him. That Jayhawk League didn't play games this year, and so they'll play in the spring, and he'll already come to Missouri. He was a fullback in high school, signed with Miami. I've seen him on some film where he's practicing without pads, fairly live. He's certainly a thick, quick guy, and but I'll take a pass on him. I haven't seen him really in any kind of game film. They also brought in, though, Makai Wingo, the defensive tackle from DeSmet, easily the best defensive lineman in Missouri. Wicked quickness, change of direction. Think of Jerron Baston, the defensive tackle from Blue Springs that Gary Pinkel brought in. about that same size, 6'1", very thick, very quick. Only this new guy is a little bit more bend, more torque. I think is a better player. That's Makai Wingo. They brought in some defensive ends, but I don't see many of them staying at defensive end. They brought in a junior college player, Daniel Robledo from East LA College. Again, that's in Monterey, California. And again, they didn't play this fall. So you go with his freshman film, and he's a big, thick guy, 6'5", 280-ish. He plays what's called a 5 technique, which is right on the outside eye of the tackle, which if you play an odd defense, he's the type you want that anchors the run there, and it's got a will linebacker, a strong safety right outside him. Missouri doesn't play that, so I could see him moving down inside and being ahead of the curve for size and quickness in there, and maybe he becomes like a Walter Palmore that they had a couple of years ago. Defensive end, they brought in Shamar Pearl, really re-signed him. They got him out of Plano High School when he was a senior. He didn't qualify, and he went to Garden City, Kansas, Jayhawk League, didn't play games this past fall. So what you see is his freshman junior college film. He's big, strong, great stature, 6'5 plus, 255, very strong at the point of attack. But again, upfield, quickness, explosion, open space, he might not be what you want. Maybe he knocks down and plays over the guard. Interesting guy, Kyron Montgomery. He's from Indianapolis, Indiana. Exciting size, quickness, agility, torque, bend ratio, off the charts. Actual tough at the point of attack, shed blocks not as good. So he's going to take some time, develop some strength. But the guy he reminds me of at the same stage, mind you, and this guy took off, was Skylar Sulak when he came out of Rockdale, Texas. Looked just like that, 6'5", 240, didn't play the run quite well instead, but really got better as Pat Ivy worked with him at Missouri. Other defensive ends they brought in, Travian Ford from Lutheran North. I've got him ranked as the best player in the state of Missouri, high school, explosive, 6'3", 230-ish, had offers from a lot of people, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Alabama, stayed with Missouri. He's very hard guy to block. That school he plays for, Lutheran North, has had Ronnie Perkins, who starts at Oklahoma, and has Antonio Doyle, who's at Texas A&M in the last 2 years. I'd rather have this guy. This guy is kind of a tweener. He's a hybrid guy, excellent change of direction for that size, exciting player. They picked up another defensive end, Jonathan Jones from McKinney, Texas, 6'4", 235. I think he kind of, again, not to take this out of context, but at the same stage, Hitchcock, Texas, Michael Sam looked a little bit like Jonathan Jones did at the same stage. Very intense player, functional strength, bends well. So defensive end, they really loaded up. Inside linebacker, they got two. I really like one of them, Damian Wilson, the inside linebacker from King Mountain, North Carolina. Tremendous change of direction, very explosive, accelerates, very sudden type of player. So I think he immediately maybe gets in your depth chart as a true freshman, maybe gets in your depth chart. The other guy, Zachary Levitt, I think takes some time. He's a linebacker from Rockledge, Florida. He's a very smooth, silky guy. Kind of reminds me of Wilkins, the linebacker they brought in 2 years ago. He's pretty good in confined space. He's not explosively strong. Then I think the player position grouping, I think that people will remember from this 2021 class is the defensive backs. Here's where I mentioned that I think Drink is putting his signature on things. I think he saw Arkansas with a 6'4", 230 wideout. I think he saw the big, long, tough to cover wideouts at Florida. He knows what's coming with Georgia. These big guys, he doesn't like the matchups. He loves Ware at corner, but Ware's 6 foot. He really likes Rakestraw's 6'1" plus. So you're going to see longer, leaner corners coming, and I think it starts now. Two of them, I think, are the rough equivalent of Rakestraw when he came in a year ago. Davian Sistrunk, he's from Melbourne, Florida. He's about 6'3". He's kind of slender. He needs strength, but he's got a sudden break on a thrown ball. Awesome in zone coverage, very good at man coverage. Willing run support, needs some work on his tackling, but a very willing run support guy. And the other corner I like a lot is the one from another guy from Ben Davis High School in Indianapolis, Dylan Cornell. I think he's really quick, change of direction, clothing speed, break on the ball, willing, no problem with contact, willing to tackle. I think those are the two corners that maybe you see them in nickel packages early in their career. They brought in some other defensive backs. They brought in Zacon Reeves from Cocoa, Florida, willing run support guy, very physical, runs well. He's a little bit raw. They brought in Darian Jackson, a defensive back from Red Oaks, Texas. Again, his speed is very good. His break on the ball is sudden enough. He's kind of a long strider. I don't think he's nearly as ready to play as those first two guys. And then one last guy, Tyler Hibbler, is from Cardinal Ritter, a school that's been producing players lately, a private school, Catholic school, urban St. Louis. He's about 6 foot, 183. I think he reminds me a little bit, this is going back, but Pinkel had a kid from Brentwood, Missouri called Hardy Ricks, was about that same size and speed. He's a run support guy primarily. So this guy, Hibbler from Ritter, very strong run support, good enough pass coverage, but he's really an in the box type of safety. So, as that signing day comes near, that was kind of my view on what I saw.
Danny, I wish you'd prepared better for this call. This is great work. Thank you. Let's talk about the quarterback, Tyler Macon. Missouri's going to be very deep at quarterback, it looks like, for a few years to come. Is there room for everybody on the team?
I hope so, because it's a contact sport and you're 2 quarters away from 2 twisted ankles and your third guy's in there. So one of the, in Metro St. Louis where I live, one of the big conversation is Macon or Bazelak, and it's not a conversation to me. To me, the only reason you even talk about that is because Macon's coming in January. Because if he weren't, it's an incredible conversation to even have, meaning Bazelak's your guy. But when a player does not come in early, what's happening is the quarterbacks in college programs are advancing at a much accelerated rate than high school kids. They're throwing to kids, often in indoor facilities, yards marked off, kids that run at college speed, run college passing route tree routes with other quarterbacks. That's so for a high school quarterback to not be in that environment and expect them to advance it the same way, it's not going to happen. So given that Tyler is going to be there for that, why would anyone think that Connor Bazelak would not continue to improve? All he's done is improve. He's taken step change after step change positive. From the time he played last year, prior to the injury at Arkansas, he comes out against Alabama, throws near shoulder outs that are at 18 yards, frozen ropes. All he does is come in and take what you give him, dink and dunk, versus LSU. Exactly, what you want to do, be patient. So why would anybody think he would be stuck where he is and not get better? I hope, Gary, that Sean Robinson stays with the program. He represents quality depth. He's the kind of athlete that Macon is now. He hasn't been able to fend off Bazelak, but he's a guy you want in your program, and it looks like Brady Cook's on schedule. So to me, football is a numbers game. It's a measure of your roster depth. Even before COVID, that's what football is. When you got to play your fourth guard, how can he stand up against Southeast Conference defensive tackles? And so why not quarterback be a position of serious strength? Now that smacks against reality. I want minutes. I want to play. I realize that. So I'm Dusty Springfield wishing and hoping. I hope they all stay.
With the uncertainty that the pandemic's created in the high school schedules this year, we've had some schools defer to the spring, some had to cancel their seasons early. Will there be any more kids signing on the latter signing date in February this year than past?
I don't think so. I don't think there will be more. I think there'll be less, but I'm not sure it's got much to do with that, Mark, is the unknown fixed number of scholarships that are going to be available. Right now, all the recruiting coordinators, Casey Woods, what's on all their minds is what's going to be the total amount of scholarships allowed now that seniors who could enter the transfer porthole and go to a graduate program somewhere. But now you got everybody program wide, all programs granted an extra year. And so all of a sudden you're going to have these bulges on your roster, and you're going to take years to work that out. So I don't think, I just don't think that there are going to be more signings and get themselves into a corner. I think as good as a deed it was for Missouri to give the walk-on Cannon a full scholarship, I think that's days of future past. I don't think that happens. These scholarships are going to be valued so much, and still until things are sorted out. How many I can bring in? Do I want graduate transfers? What's the number I can work with? What that's going to be? And so, Mark, I think your scenario fits into that. Will there be more kids signing late? I don't think so. I think this 85 number that's going to expand to some unknown number, and I don't know what that is. I don't know how to manage my roster numbers. I think that is kind of oversees everything.
When you look at Mizzou's commitment list, one thing that I did notice missing, there's no kids from the Kansas City area. You think that was a reflection of the talent in this area this year, or just Coach Drink hasn't made enough inroads over here?
I don't think it was a reflection of the talent. Tabucci, who went to Auburn, certainly is a player Missouri would like to have. Big, tall, 6'5", 235, raw, unpolished, but very athletic, runs super well. Bo Stevens, the offensive tackle from Blue Springs, extremely aggressive, great feet, a better athlete than people think. I think Missouri would have loved to have him. Now, I don't know the Missouri coaches yet, but there was a player I loved at Lincoln Prep with Tabucci, Howard Brown. And Howard Brown made his name as a quarterback, as a 6'2.5", 310-pound quarterback who maybe for a dozen snaps all year played defensive tackle. But he is a thick, quick, fast twitch fiber guy with a super change direction. Iowa State saw him and took him in a heartbeat. So are there players there that I think Missouri, I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt that they evaluated all these players. They probably couldn't get Tabucci. They probably couldn't get Steven. I don't know what their position was on Howard Brown, but it wasn't a reflection on player quality at all, I don't think.
I want to ask you how much more difficult your job was made by the pandemic and evaluating kids this year.
Well, it actually caused me to stop at 30 years being proprietor and operator of STC Grid Reports. We began in '89, where I converted from lead scout individual for a number of different schools to creating a company that provided scouting reports nationally to football programs only. And we kind of morphed that when the internet became very prevalent and you could start to send game film 5 minutes after a game out to Los Angeles and recruiting coordinators could be reviewing it. We morphed into, we are the verifiers on the ground of what you're seeing on film. because film doesn't lie, right? No, film lies tremendously. And film may look like something, and their coach may tell you, my offensive tackle who's 6'5" and 285 and obliterating this guy from Monterey. Well, when you find out the person comes in for a visit, or you finally sign the guy sight unseen, and the guy comes in, he's not 6'5", 285. He's 6'3" and a half, and he's 320, and he played against two-way competitions that were the equivalent of orange pylon cones. You find that out too late, they're signed. So what we became is on the ground verifiers. And we did that for 30 years, and we did it well. And we had just in this last year, our clients included Michigan, Indiana, Northwestern, UCLA, USC. But the answer to your question, Mark, the COVID situation allowed allowed access to all sorts of activities starting in February. I need to be able to get into wrestling matches. I need to be able to get into the outside linebacker who plays small forward. I need to see him play basketball. I need to see combines. I need to see 7-on-7 competitions. I need to see in the summer scrimmages. I need to see fall games. All of that became very stressful and hard. And so it just seemed the time to stop things after 30 years. So we went from 1989 to 2019, and we shut her down.
I'm sorry to hear that, because you do your homework, and it's very interesting to hear you talk. So folks, we're talking to Danny Heitert, a recruiting expert out of the St. Louis area. If you'd like to ask a question, please refer to the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Danny, we talked earlier about Coach Drink. Going into the season, Missouri was given low expectations on the win total. With 2 games remaining, they're going to be no worse than 500, have a chance to maybe win 6 or 7 games. I think we all feel really good about the direction of the program.
Yeah, one of the things I said earlier about he says the right things. He should be humble, and he expresses humility about where they're at and what they need to improve on. And I don't think if they win 7, I don't think he's going to all of a sudden think that guarantees anything. I think he, if anything, tries harder. So I just like what I see about him a lot. They're going to line up when they play Georgia's defensive front and secondary. It's going to be Kentucky, who was super high quality defensive front and secondary, very high quality. For all their problems, it was their offensive guys they axed, not their defensive guys. And when Drink saw what he was going to see, and I'm going to connect this to Georgia and why I think they've got a shot. Is he said something pregame, because I really am intent to listen to what he says. And he said, before they ever snapped the ball, he said, look, they will play their second level defenders. Their strong safety types are outside linebackers and inside linebackers. They all play off the ball 4 to 6. They invite you there. It looks soft. It looks like it's attackable. It's not. At the snap, at a heartbeat, in a nanosecond, they're flying there from leverage angles with big, long athletes who have been trained to react to just that. So they bait you into taking something. So he said, I can see that that's what they're doing. So you watch what they did at Kentucky: off tackle, off tackle, off tackle, boring, off tackle. So the same thing he did this past week with Arkansas. He stayed with off tackle until that fourth quarter. Didn't go early. And in the fourth quarter, a lot of that damage, those 21 points, came off tackle to the short side of the field. So he says the right things. I've known too many coaches that are brilliant people. Their mind works a mile a minute. They can design exotic plays that take up 2 notebooks. And they force things at game time when they're really not appropriate, just to kind of show off that they know this stuff and can coach this stuff. I like the way he coaches. He says magic words. He says, Connor, don't get bored with this stuff. Drop it off. So he does that as a coach. He doesn't get bored with what works, although he could dazzle you in other ways. So you take that and you put it up against Georgia. Georgia's going to take Kentucky's front and it's going to be magnified by the type of athlete you see there. But hats off to Marcus Johnson. I did not think that this line a year ago, I didn't know who Mike Maietti was, so I held my fire on him. But I said, Case Cook has a very meager ceiling on athleticism and explosivity. Larry Borum, I said, look, he's best case scenario, C+ quickness, and he's too often he doesn't reach that. He gets beat across his face. I said Delgado's a good athlete. If I wasn't sure what they were going to do. I hadn't seen Powell at left tackle, but I got to give Johnson credit. I mean, Borum is playing C+ quickness, but every snap. Case Cook is playing hard, and he's playing to his ability. Maietti has the benefit of not being covered by nosemen because the conference doesn't use many odd man fronts. So he doesn't get 320 on his head very often. He gets a free path to a Mike linebacker. Delgado, very athletic. Powell, very athletic. They pull. So I think they are going to be able to angle some things, pull some things. Larry Roundtree's going to run. He's going to be Larry Roundtree. So look, they've got a shot. They don't fumble, cut their penalties down like they have most games, not last game. Cut their penalties down. Don't turn it over. They've got a shot.
Okay. Ready for some questions? Gabe DeArmond is reporting that one of the East St. Louis wideouts could be back on the market soon. Dominic Levet had verbal to Arizona State. And you know anything about that?
Oh, yeah. I don't know about that, but I know about Dominic. That would be a good thing. Now, Arizona State's 0-2, pro coach. 2 of their games have been canceled, COVID related. And so they're 0-2 at this point. This is, I mentioned earlier, players, if they're going to switch, it's usually early. Well, let's call 0-2 early. That's all the games they play. Dominic Lovett. East St. Louis had 3 kids that everybody wanted. A wide receiver, Keontae Lewis, that's going to UCLA. Tyler Macon is going to Missouri. And Dominic Lovett to Arizona State. Of the 3, I said, look, I'd have Lovett. He's the one I want. People in Kansas City that know Blue Springs. Long time ago, Brandon Lloyd was a wide receiver. People that
Iowa, right?
Brandon Lloyd was a high school 7-foot high jumper. No exaggeration, 7 foot. He ran like the wind, wide receiver. Went to the University of Illinois, played in the NFL. Lovett reminds me of Brandon Lloyd. Lovett would be a major get.
It would be a dandy. Question, on a perennial power team, a better than average player might look great, whereas on a poor team, a terrific player might not appear to be so good. How much do you take the team into account, and how hard is it to take that into account when you do your evaluations?
Excellent question. Who's that from?
Paul Blackman.
Paul, excellent question. And I'll give you an example. I get asked who are the best nuggets I've ever found. And I usually mention 2. Scott Starks, who went to Hazelwood East, was 5'9". Missouri didn't want him. And one of the people subscribed, Wisconsin, asked me about him. I said, you want him? He ended up being all Big Ten twice as a corner, played in the NFL. The other one was a kid named Chesson, Chesson, 4 years ago from Ladue when they won a state championship, high school receiver. He went to Michigan, made all Big Ten. Now, what I'm getting at is Chesson, his junior year, played in an offense where there was a quarterback who couldn't get the ball to him. They'd one hop it to him. And so some of the best catches I saw that year were by Chesson from Ladue, and they were because the degree of difficulty because of the poor quarterbacking was him. And so I said, look, if this guy, I said to Michigan, if this guy ever had a quarterback, he's 6'3", he's 190, he runs like the wind, hand-eye is excellent. And so the answer to that question is I always take that into account. If he's playing, he's not responsible for what's around him. Actually, Paul, if I give him actually added points for that. If it's an inside linebacker and his front is just free releasing people down on him, and he's having to tag off 2 blockers to get to a gap downhill and smoke somebody. Kudos to that guy, because he's done it much harder from the guy who played in a scheme with some powerhouse with defensive front that kept them clean. So not only do I account for it, I often give extra points for it.
Question if regarding a wide receiver, Michael Sturdivant, formerly of Kansas City area, now in Dallas, has committed to Cal, has a sister at Mizzou. Is he a possible switch? Do you know much about him?
I don't know much about him, and I don't know anything about the switch.
Okay. Any players on signing date that we might possibly flip, or any commitments we could lose to another school?
You know, that part of it, I really, quick answer is I don't know, and here's why. I kind of focus on how they play. And if I, just by chance, by osmosis, I hear where they're going or where they're tending, I listen to it. I mean, I pay attention to all that stuff. I'm interested in it, but it's not what I do. So I'm not aware of who might flip or who might come. But you asked me about Dominic Lovett. I know the player, so I told you about the player. I don't know anything about his inclination to come or go.
Another question from Paul. Pandemic year aside, back in the day, how many games did you go to in person? And then later, how much was videoed?
In person, on a Friday night, I would usually do this. I would usually, it depends where I was at, because I would go all throughout Missouri and sometimes into Kansas, sometimes into Illinois. But I would try the best of my ability to find a game, because in St. Louis, sometimes there's 4 o'clock rush hour games, particularly urban areas or any area where there might be a security concern, they'll have an afternoon game. So I would go to a rush hour game, see a half or 3/4, go to the first half of a game. I tried to find games that had multiple players or an awesome matchup of somebody, a blocker and a defensive end, something like that, or a wide receiver versus a D-back, and the second half of another game. So I usually every Friday see 3 games. Some Illinois, Missouri, sometimes St. Louis would have Saturday games. So again, a first and a second half. I'd average 5 games in person per weekend for 30 years. Video, absolutely, absolutely. A lot more video, but in person, 5 per weekend usually.
Okay. Could you give a quick rundown of other SEC schools recruiting? Missouri, I think, is 7th in the SEC and 20th overall. But what about the rest of the conference?
You know, I know what I know, and I'm free to admit what I don't know. What I know is the borders of Missouri. I really know that quite well, and that's been my focus. There are some clients, Kentucky would get my publications. The last 3 years they did, but I can't answer that. I'm not privy. I'm not saying I'm not interested, because signing days, I'll be there to see who signed who and did I ever see any of those players, but I don't know.
Of the recruits on Missouri's 2021 commitments, who excites you the most?
Oh, I would say, let me think about this for a second. I would say the 2 defensive backs. I would say Davian Sistrunk from Melbourne, Florida, the 6'3" corner. And I'd say Dylan Cornell, the Indianapolis corner that's about 6'1". I'd say those 2. And the reason I say that, if you remember all hot and bothered we were a year ago, or I guess it would be last February, when Rakestraw came on board. To me, I don't mean to be redundant, but I think these 2 are roughly equivalent. Those would be the 2.
Okay. I want to ask you about Isaac Thompson, class of 22 kid that committed last week. We're a year away from him signing, but that seems like a pretty good get from Mizzou.
Yeah, he's from St. Louis University High School, which for the audience, academically, that's in Eastern Missouri, that's as good as it gets. And so I think he fits this model that I see emerging by Drinkwitz, and that is bigger, longer defensive backs. And so he fits that perfectly. He's about 6'1", maybe a shade more. He's about 185. I've seen him in person. I've seen him in drills. I've seen him in 7-on-7s, and he runs extremely well. Solid, slick, change direction, no problem whatsoever with contact. Will run support, quick, hard, deliberate, sudden. High points the ball, fine hand-eye coordination. I see him more as a strong safety type, different schemes, call that position, different things. So it's kind of similar to a weak outside linebacker, but it's dropped into the box a little bit more. So I see him as a guy who could, depending on what your rest of your roster looks like, he's got the quality, size, speed, experience, no problem with contact, the kind you see getting reps in your two deep as a true freshman when he arrives. He's that type.
Coach Drinkwitz said today that any senior who decides to come back after the season won't count against the 85-man scholarship limit. Missouri's currently at 59. What opportunities in the transfer portal do you see?
Well, I don't know about coming in. I just don't know that. And what happens is when Hazleton came in last year, I immediately pulled up all of Virginia Tech stuff and looked at it. But I don't know preemptively who's coming or anything like that. But I would expect that there would be transfers. I'm very interested to see if any of our seniors, say a Kobe Whiteside or somebody, decides to stay around. I mean, that immediately, because this class brings in one junior college defensive lineman, two junior college defensive ends, one of which two out of two of them might knock down inside ultimately and play defensive line. So I don't have any knowledge who might be coming in, but I will admit to being mightily interested to see who stays and uses an extra year.
Question on video. Do you trust the highlight films or is it always a game body of work film?
It's neither. And what it is, here's the technique. And it's where did I get this information I looked at when I kind of expressed my opinions about some of the kids that are intending to sign with Missouri. Here's the methodology. The highlight films are biased, they're cherry picked, they're not the true picture. So what I do is I find out who is the opponent's schedule of the person I'm evaluating. So I go on Hubble and I find those teams that they played, and I find the best, one of two things. I find the best teams they played or the best individual matchups I could find. And I play those entire games and find out, not when this guy was, extracted the highlights of his film, but when he's part of a body of work against either a quality team or a quality individual, and I look at them that way. So that's a probably more complete way to answer that question. I give almost no value to highlights. I give a lot of value to the body of work within an entire game. But even better than that, I'm looking for specific games and specific matchups.
Very interesting. We talked about Ennis Rakestraw. How did you evaluate his first season?
Excellent. Just excellent. Mentally very tough. Got a relief pitcher's mentality. They hit it out, go back to work. It's another snap. It's another batter. Very physical, maybe too physical. Beyond the when he pulls even and side by side with people, he's still jostling people. He's still knocking people around. So that's a gutsy position. You really have to have hard bark to play that position. And again, he's one of our taller guys, but if you see what he's up against, when you look at the people in this conference and the tendency towards 6'4" to 6'6" receivers and not pencil necks either. These are big, strong guys. I think he did tremendous. And I was pleasantly surprised with Ennis Rakestraw.
Last question. This is from Paul. It seems that Southern schools have so many more rural players, whereas in Missouri, fewer and fewer that don't come from St. Louis or Kansas City metros. Is that just my imagination, or is it outstate football not that good in Missouri? We used to get a lot of those types in the Dan Devine and Alana Frio areas.
There might be a little bit of a story underneath that, Paul, and that is when Onofrio would get, and not only that, Pinkel would grab players out of smaller schools. Colin Brown is some of these smaller schools, and you'd see different guards and tackles coming from places. I remember outside of Kansas City, the little town had the 6'6" offensive tackle actually called some reported in some post game shows for the Missouri Network about 7 years ago. Who am I talking about?
I can see him and I can't remember his name now.
Okay, so we've had those type of players.
Curtis Gregory.
Curtis
Gregory.
Thanks,
Bingo.
Paul.
Thank you, Paul. We've had those players a long time, and I think what's happened is that with video files being so readily available in the coin of the realm now, being sent everywhere, almost anybody can be discovered. And so I think I think those players are still there, but I think players where bigger populations are now being discovered. So it wasn't that you couldn't see undiscovered gems in big areas; they were concealed. So if you kind of think counterintuitively on this, if you were a big fish in a small pond like Curtis Gregory, you stood out, man. You stood out. If you were a Curtis Gregory type and you were in some little county school or little Catholic private school, 10 years ago, you might have been overlooked. Impossible nowadays. It's just impossible. So if there is a pendulum swing towards urban metro areas, meaning outer suburbs, all inclusive, it may be just logical because density of population and discoverability is better now than it was then.
Danny, this has been an absolute treat. Thank you very much for spending your afternoon with us. You really know your stuff, and we hope we can get you back again. Don't forget, National Signing Date is next Wednesday. We'll all be anxious to see who the Tigers officially ink. And I think it's fair to say nobody knows recruiting around this area better than Danny Heitert. So thanks again, Danny. Folks, next week we will have Blair Kirchhoff from the Kansas City Star. In 2 weeks, we'll have Ben Arnett from the Missouri Network as our guest. And then on the last Zoom meeting of the year, we will have on the 29th, Mike DeCourcy, who is the national basketball correspondent for the Sporting News. So make sure you tune in, spread the word about our Zoom calls, and you can watch these in full on YouTube. They'll be posted a day or two later. So thanks everybody for looking in today. We'll see you next week when we have Blair Kirchhoff from the Star. Have a great week, everybody.